just to shift gears a little bit, I mean, this sounds like a great way for a traditional land investor who's just, buying very low and reselling, buying 30 to 50 cents and selling, or I'm sorry, buying, 20 to 30 to 40 cents and selling for, 70, 80 cents. To add to their business strategy, and can really separate them from the competition. What are some ways to target these types of properties and to figure out if these properties have these kind of possibilities?
Right. So taking like the subdivision, example in mind, the one of the ways you can do it, if you're trying to do it from a direct mail approach, one of the things that you can do, and I've done this in the past too, is if you look at the zoning regulations for the county that you're in, it's going to identify each of the list of zones that they're in that county. So maybe like an A1 zone, an R1, R2, R3, then goes to C1, C2, C3. So you'll have that broad range of agricultural to residential to commercial zones and maybe even industrial. So you're going to have all those zones that are there. And each one of those zones, they're going to have a minimum lot size that is attached to it. So maybe in the agricultural zone, maybe it's like a 2-acre minimum. And then kind of go into the residentials, it starts getting down a little bit smaller, 10,000, 5,000 square feet, etc. And so they're going to give you this minimum lot size requirement, right? Well, the thing is that you can do is you can actually go and utilize that information through whatever data provider you use. If you're using DataTree or whatever, you can go in and say, okay, I want to look at this county, I want to look at this zoning designation, and I want to look at all properties that are above this square footage number. And so if it's a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size, I know that if I want to subdivide, I want to be able to get at least 20,000 square feet, right? So then I'll put that in as my filter as well. And so what I'm doing with this is I'm weeding out every potential property that's out there that I know on the surface will not qualify. And so I know that if I have a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size and I want to do at least a 2-lot subdivision, I need that 20,000 square feet. You can move that number up and down, right? That 20,000, you can move up to 40, 50, however many to get the number of lots that you're looking at doing as the size of your project. So that's one way that I've done it, where you go about actually identifying subdivision opportunities, because it's all based on the zoning. You have to start with that and kind of reverse engineer it. So you have to really understand what is allowed in that zone from like a lot size perspective. And this is just for subdivisions specifically,
Okay.
So that's one way that you can use the direct mail approach to do that. Very similarly, you can, if you're somebody that's looking at more underutilized property, you can look for vacant land that's zoned commercially, right? Or vacant land that's zoned for residential. That's going to give you this underutilized property situation where the property is not living up to its highest and best use based on the allowable zoning. So if you have a situation where you have a vacant lot that's commercially zoned, or even a lot that has a single family house on it that's commercially zoned, in either of those circumstances, the property is not living up to its full potential based on what's allowed under the current zoning designation. So you look at that and you identify those opportunities. And now let's say I have a single family house that's in the midst of other commercial development, which that does happen quite often.
Yeah.
Now I have this opportunity to actually change that land use based on its current zoning by basically replacing that single family house.
Right.
So, I mean, obviously in that case, there's already a structure on it, but let's just say it was a raw land lot.
Yeah.
So, I guess there's a couple of questions. One is you can look at that lot, and where we typically are trying to get 20, 25, maybe 30 cents on the dollar when we acquire a property, you could actually go up quite a bit more if it's necessary. You go to 60 or 70% of market value on the purchase, because you know that you're going to be adding value by the redesignation. So you're still going to get your margin in there.
Absolutely. I mean, if I'm going in and buying 8%, that's my downside protection. Worst case scenario, if something goes sideways and my entitlement doesn't get approved and I have to sell the property. If I'm buying at 80%, hopefully I'm able to make it where at least I wash clean after everything's all said and done, and I can just move on from it. And so that's kind of my protection measure. So yeah, what it does as a land investor, it allows you to kind of distinguish yourself from others because you have that knowledge base and know how to add value. But it also allows you, very practically, it allows you to offer more than other land investors. And so now your offer is obviously that much more attractive.
So when you do that, I mean, those almost, I mean, something like that almost sounds like a one-off opportunity. I mean, you're identifying uniquely valuable situations. When you do that, are you going in and purchasing the property and then going and finding a buyer, or are you going in and locking it up and trying to secure, somebody on the buy side before you actually commit to it?
Trying to find somebody to secure on the buy side before I commit. More often than not, that's what I'm trying to do. So taking the most basic example of like a single family house or something like that. So say, for example, I pick up a larger parcel, I go through the subdivision process, and then I also go through the process of getting each of those lots entitled for the actual single family houses. At that point, well before I've gotten involved in that deal, I should have at least a couple of potential buyers that I've talked to that have expressed that there is demand and that they actually would have interest in purchasing those. And so I'll either sell those all off to one builder, or you may have a couple different builders that you're going to sell off to. But to answer the question, more often than not, I'm trying to identify the potential buyer early on, as early as I can, just to be able to protect myself and give myself a little bit more certainty. It doesn't mean that I can't go about it the other way. I just, in order for me to feel more certain going in, that's the preference.
Right. No, I think that it would be a wise recommendation for anybody. There are, so many stories out there, especially probably in recent years, but where, developers and real estate investors are paying market value, and in some cases above market value, because they're going to do an improvement play.
Right.
But boy, those improvements can take a while, and the economy can shift.
Yeah.
And so, like you said earlier, if you're at least, paying no more than 80 cents of market value, hopefully you got a pretty good chance of liquidating that asset and getting all or most of your money out.
Right. I mean, and I also don't, from my preference and what I do and what I advocate is that I don't get into the actual physical development side myself. There's
Right.
other people, there's developers out there that do that. And the bigger they are, the more ability they have to spread their risk across their entire portfolio. So they're able to hold property through a cycle much easier, than maybe the smaller guy or that I would be willing to.
Right.
So like Pardee or something like that, they are willing to sit on a property and go through that entitlement process for like 1,000 lot subdivision and hold it for 5-10 years and go through that process, or hold it through the cycle. They're happy, they're fine to do that. In my situation, I'm not selling the Pardee obviously, but even like some of the smaller regional builders are willing to kind of take that on because they just understand that that's the risk that they take.
Right. Very interesting. I have another friend who does a model, like it's land banking for these large public builders, where they're public companies. They want to show their PE ratios high, and they don't want to have the inventory on their books, but they still need to secure land for the 5-year and 10-year out developments. So these guys will target farmland that's cash flowing, that they can buy, and that they've done the due diligence around the entitlements to make sure that the builder can do what they want when it comes time. And they'll take down these large pieces of farmland that are targeted to be a subdivision in 5 years, and with all their investor capital, and they'll hold it. And with basically double or triple your money in the 5 years. And they've already got their buyer pretty much under contract with an option.
That's great. Yeah, there's so many different ways again to go about doing that. And that's great. That's a really cool way about
The thing is, it works very similarly for like solar farms and things like that as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. All right, well, cool. So Mike, so you talked about, seeking these properties from a direct mail perspective. but you also mentioned before the show, we were talking about buying from wholesalers because of the fact that it's an improvement play. You can pay 80 cents on the dollar. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about that strategy.
Sure. I mean, the general concept is that, you know, every investor, we're at one point along the food chain, so to speak, you know, and really your whole business could be settled on one part of that food chain, or you can really be on different parts of that food chain based on the transaction that you're doing. And so what I've basically said is that, you know, everybody that's out there that's doing land wholesaling, those are people that I would go to pick up these kind of opportunities. And so what that does is that eliminates a lot of the direct mail approach. Nothing wrong with the direct mail approach because I know it works really well, especially in the wholesale arena. But for me, I could go and do the direct mail thing and skip over the wholesaler, or I can actually go directly to the wholesaler themselves, which is what I prefer to do, and then go about and picking up those properties. And so if the wholesaler is out there picking up at 30 to 40 cents and they're willing to sell to me at wholesale at 80 cents, and it fits the strategy really well. And from my perspective, it's a matter of saving some of that time and money on that side. And then the trade-off is that I'm spending time and money on the thing that I have that actual expertise in, right?
Right, right.
Not as though I eliminate the money or I eliminate the time. It just shifts to another part of the process.